Oh, and welcome to the Crypto Beat. I'm your host, Kelvin Sparks, and with me today is my co-host, Tim Copeland, head of growth at the Block. And joining us, we have Lucas Bruder, co-founder and CEO of Jito Labs, and Thomas, the CCO, Chief Compliance Officer at the Jito Foundation. So, welcome to the show, and how's it going, guys?
Pretty good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great. I've never done one with Lucas before. I'm very, very excited about that.
Oh, so it definitely should be a fun one. But before we get started, just want to make a quick note that if you're hiring crypto, you should absolutely use Campus. Out of all your candidates, it'll help you pick out the real crypto natives. And head to theblock.co/campus to get a 3-month free trial. On a separate note, if you're tracking the crypto treasury trade, we have some fantastic charts on our data dashboard. That's theblock.co/data. We have Ethereum treasury companies, Bitcoin, and Solana. We're planning to do soon. Now, on today's episode about liquid staking. So, guys, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. And for the average person or somebody new to crypto, how would you explain what liquid staking is?
Yeah. So I think to explain liquid staking, you have to back up and zoom out into what staking is before you can kind of dive into liquid staking. I'll kind of explain it in terms of, the protocols and things like that. And then maybe Tom can chime in with some, coming from a TradFi background, some analogies perhaps that others might understand. But yeah, there's a bunch of different crypto assets. There's Bitcoin, which is proof of work. There's Ethereum and Solana and many others that are proof of stake. Proof of stake kind of took over. Essentially, proof of stake is, there's a bunch of machines that are communicating with each other. The amount of power that you get in the network is determined in how much stake you have. If you do something, you are incentivized to do something good if you have a lot of stake, and if you do something bad, then you will essentially get slashed, or like some of your stake will go away. So it's kind of a proof of stake is a way to secure these networks. So we're a liquid staking token on Solana. So Solana has a bunch of validators, and you can stake to them. And the more stake you have, the more blocks you produce, and the more weight your validator carries in consensus. And so typically when you are staking, you are blocking those funds, essentially delegating them to a validator. And those funds are uh, essentially tied or like locked up for 2 to 4 days on that validator. And that is not super capital efficient. You have all these assets in that are locked on this validator, and you can't go and use it in DeFi or anything. So I think Rocket Pool or Lido created liquid staking in maybe 2021 that basically when you can boss it into a protocol, and it mints you back a receipt token. So that receipt token is basically saying that here's kind of a mirrored token or a receipt token for the assets that you put into the protocol, and you can go and freely trade that receipt token. So on Solana, it's just another SPL token. You can go participate in DeFi or even some CeFi options nowadays.
All right, we appear to have lost Kelvin, but I believe he'll join us back again when he can. Cool. Now, the big thing recently was there was a big decision by the SEC to allow for liquid staking, noting the activity falls outside of securities laws. The question I think I have right now is, like, what does that mean for liquid staking projects, obviously like Jito, and the sort of wider ecosystem?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to this because I think that the not only was the SEC guidance important, but Commissioner Peirce also, thought it useful to submit a follow-on statement, which he called the staking sequel, and describes liquid staking as a new solution to an old problem. As Lucas was kind of referring to, there is this situation where you can post assets on the network, which helps to ensure the security of the network, but it does kind of tie up these assets. And so liquid staking can be seen as, like, how do you liberate or how do you use or transfer ownership or possession of assets that are actually hard to transact in. And one good example of in today's society is like gold. If you trade spot gold with a bank, what you're actually doing is you're trading receipts. You don't actually have to physically move gold from one location to another. And so the use of gold kind of receipts is the way to kind of liberate some of these assets. And so by providing some clarity on liquid staking, what the SEC has done is actually very, very monumental, but for very narrow kind of pockets of market participants. And so for some of the impacts of this is very substantial in the fact that like US firms or US persons can now contemplate the trading of liquid staking tokens without worry of prosecution that they're trading in some form of unregistered securities. And if you look at prosecution over the last few years, you can see that there's a number of large, high-profile firms that have been prosecuted for trading unregistered securities. And so by removing that kind of overhang, we've actually seen a lot of US firms who have been reluctant to trade liquid staking tokens now being able to contemplate it. Another example is exchanges. So if you look at a lot of the prosecutions over the years, it's with exchanges listing unregistered securities. And so now exchanges can list liquid staking tokens without having to worry about prosecutions in the same way that, in the same vein, DeFi protocols can now integrate liquid staking tokens without worry that, a regulator is going to come knock on their door. Another big impact is on custodians. If you're trading securities, you have to custody your assets with a qualified custodian. Now you can custody there's a lot more flexibility in who you custody with. Another big thing with the clarification is that the SEC has actually ceded regulatory authority over these products. Like the SEC is responsible for oversight of securities, and this actually puts liquid staking tokens under the aegis of the CFTC. And there's a lot of regulatory burdens on securities. There's like registration, there's listing requirements, there's ongoing regulatory reporting obligations, things like that. And so this has freed liquid staking tokens from a lot of those obligations. But the big thing for us is, I think that this removes one of the last big barriers to the inclusion of liquid staking tokens inside an ETF.
Okay, what do you think this will do for the adoption of liquid staking tokens across Solana and maybe other ecosystems?
Well, I think that this has opened the door to a lot of people actually able to incorporate liquid staking tokens in the management of their treasuries or how they're allocating their assets across different kind of trading strategies. There are a lot of people that we have spoken to who get the appeal of liquid staking tokens. And I think that they have different utilities or different kind of primary utilities for ETH and Solana. I think, the main issue with ETH is the length of the unbonding curve, where, if there's a lot of people who want to unbond or unstake their Ethereum, it can extend the amount of time before their Ethereum is released. Solana doesn't have that. But what Solana does have, it has kind of a much higher yield. And so by releasing the opportunity to access that yield in a very safe and compliant way, I think that this has created opportunities for lots of different trading firms, asset managers, corporate treasuries, to allow them to take advantage of some of these kind of yield-bearing opportunities that are available now with access to liquid staking tokens.
Do you think we're moving into more of a area where yield becomes so much more of a bigger thing? Because I think for a long time, projects were worried that anything sort of involving yield had securities risk and things like that. Whereas I think the beauty of crypto is you can have projects that generate on-chain transparent revenue, and in theory can then distribute this revenue potentially to token holders or just sort of members of their community or ecosystem, and it enables people to essentially theoretically invest and back projects and then benefit from their successes over time. And just there's lots of good ideas that can come from yield being an okay thing. So do you think this sort of helps move the industry towards being able to build things that are actually really useful again, rather than being so worried about the risks that we just focused the last few years on meme coins?
I think that's a great question. And I think that, Lucas and I probably have different kind of experiences with this, because I think that it is safe to say that yield has always been a very attractive concern when it comes to kind of the accessibility of yield-bearing products for retail. I think when it comes to the institutional approach, institutions are much more sensitive to this idea of where does the yield come from. You know, there's this idea that no matter what you do, like money is just not free. And in order to achieve yield, most of the time you assume as an institution that you are taking on some sort of risk. Whether it's the riskiness of the protocol, the risk of having your assets locked up or being inaccessible, you know, there's lots of different ways that you can kind of increase the yield by adding on some layer of risk. And so I do think that liquid staking tokens, from an institutional standpoint, is one that is very easy for them to understand and is now much more accessible to a broader audience. But I do think that, you know, and I don't know if, Lucas, you have very strong opinions about like the way that yield has essentially bootstrapped liquidity or interest across a lot of different blockchains and different protocols kind of in the earlier stages of their development.
Yeah, I think it's becoming a little more acceptable. And certainly there's been obviously like Terra Luna yield and how that ended up, which was pretty devastating for like the entire industry. And I think probably set it back a lot, especially with respect to yield. But yeah, I think it's becoming more acceptable. The like L1 yield is probably like the simplest type of yield that you can get and the easiest to reason about. But yeah, I think that there's a lot more education going on across the entire DeFi stack to help users understand where the yield's coming from.
And how do you think this changes how institutions view liquid staking? Because obviously you're seeing a lot more large companies getting involved with crypto, whether or not it's custodying or like sort of doing the ETFs or buying the ETFs or doing these treasury play companies or DATs, as we call them. Do you think this sort of opens the doors to liquid staking to get involved in similar ways as well?
I think very much so. And I think that by removing, essentially what you're doing by providing guidance around liquid staking is you're removing some of the frictions that have stopped people from being able to access this before. And when I say people in this context, I mostly mean people who care about regulations, which is like large institutions, large asset managers, large trading firms, people like that. And so by removing this sort of regulatory overhang, what you've done is you've now opened up the idea of liquid staking token, and then it becomes a matter of execution. And so execution, for a lot of firms, there's still other barriers, there's other frictions, such as like you might not want to set up wallet infrastructure, you might not want to have somebody who is kind of posting things on DeFi that requires potential margin, margin top-ups at like midnight on a Saturday night, things like that. You may have some kind of KYC or compliance concerns, you know, whatever. But what's happened now is that liquid staking tokens as a concept is now one that is kind of able to be packaged. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of packaging of liquid staking tokens or liquid staking token based strategies for institutions. And so one example of this is very clearly the ETF. So if and when we have a staking Solana ETF or 100% Jito Sol ETF, then there are certain strategies that large institutions are ready to deploy that now become possible because they can do it via an ETF. And one very easy example of that is just delta neutral basis trading. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's essentially like, can you lock in some sort of a forward rate or funding rate just by trading two instruments that are related, and then you just have these offsetting positions. So you're long Solana and you're short, let's say, the CME futures. And so these things will converge to the same product at expiration of the futures. And so all you have to do is you now have to account for, you know, the cost of maintaining these positions, but you get paid this carry, this forward basis carry. And so I think a lot of people in crypto in particular is very sensitive to the fact that these carry trades can be very, very profitable. And so if you have Jito Sol, for instance, packaged within an ETF, then large institutions can express this basis trade just by buying the CME future and then, buying the ETF and selling the CME future. So they get yield from the liquid staking token, and then they get the forward carry from the CME. And at some point they will converge, and that will kind of create opportunities for people, for large institutions to generate yield in a very kind of safe way. You know, one of the things about these kind of very crazy yield farming strategies from DeFi from 2021 is the fact that there was very, very large top line numbers, but they were paid in the token itself, in the underlying token. And what ended up happening is just, you know, the inflation rate was essentially a sign of how much you would expect the value of each token to decay over time. But by doing a delta neutral basis trade, essentially what you're doing is you're abstracting the underlying token out of it, and you're just putting the P&L in dollars. Like you're buying a Solana-based ETF, you're getting yield in Solana, but you can hedge out the Solana risk just by selling enough futures against it. And then all of a sudden, you just have this kind of positive dollar carry.
Yeah, now recently the SEC approved in-kind redemptions for the ETFs, and I believe they're currently weighing up whether or not to allow BlackRock to include staking for its Ethereum ETF. Do you think we could see like liquid staking coming into the ETFs this year?
I absolutely think that's going to happen. And I think that it's just going to make a better product. So if you have the view, which I do, that the best possible product design for an investor is a 100% staked ETF. So basically by 100% staked, I mean that all of the assets in the ETF are staked, which means that you get the highest possible achievable yield. So that sounds great. The big risk that issuers have to manage is what happens if there is a large redemption. Like if you have a large redemption, somebody turns in the ETF and tries to receive the underlying assets. But if all of the underlying assets are staked, then the redemptions become difficult to manage. So that's the kind of core balancing problem that ETF issuers have. So I am very strongly of the opinion that the only way that you can get to a 100% staked ETF is by using liquid staking tokens. And so I think that given the current SEC guidance around liquid staking token, given the fact that you can actually create and redeem liquid staking token ETFs in kind, and you know the direction of travel when it comes to kind of the SEC and their willingness to help issuers design the best possible product, I feel very confident that we will see. So liquid staking tokens, and Jito Sol in particular, does actually live inside an ETF today. So it is one of the constituents of SSK, which is the RecShares Stake Solana product. But I think that the current list of Solana ETFs that are in process right now, we expect them to launch probably at the end of September, early October. And I suspect that all of them will have some sort of staking element to them.
Okay, now I wanted to ask about another more recent topical sort of discussion point. But in the last couple of days, we have seen two big announcements of layer ones. So Stripe has announced that it's building a payments-focused layer one, while Circle is building a stablecoins-focused layer one. I was curious, what were you guys' reactions to seeing a couple of, major L1 announcements?
Yeah, I just put out a tweet about this. One more stablecoin chain, bro. Yeah, I think the Stripe one, I think it makes more sense than the Circle one because payments are mostly this kind of like infrastructure back office type thing. People don't really interact with it that much. And so I would say that one maybe makes a little more sense than like the Circle one. Because if you just have a chain full of stable coins, maybe it's fine for some people, but like, where are the DeFi protocols that I can earn extra yield? We've been talking about yield for this entire episode. So like, where's the yield on that? And I don't know. I mean, I think one of the narrative shifts on for Ethereum recently is kind of like the stable coin chain. There's been a lot of USDC minted on Solana too. So yeah, I guess like it's interesting to think about like the motivations for Stripe and Circle to do this. For Stripe, it's probably more control. Who knows how many fees will be collect? I guess maybe fees and like REV from people sending payments. For Circle, it's kind of unclear at this point. But
I don't know if it's
yeah.
super unclear. I think so. I moderated a panel in Paris earlier this year with Sam from A16Z and Diogo Monica and a few other people, and we had. I think one of the main things we spoke about was the way that stablecoins currently make money, and that's right now it's ultimately through the yield on the underlying holdings as well as potentially like withdrawal. I think Tether has some fees, and I think maybe Coinbase is experimenting with like some fees now for the minting and redemption. But one thing that they don't do is take a cut of essentially transactions or the actual payments themselves when they're sort of providing ultimately sort of like a payment network. Whereas like most things in life, they take a cut on the sort of transaction. I mean, most crypto projects are sort of funded by swaps. So I think that could be quite a big reason behind sort of Circle, but definitely the fintech businesses. I mean, MasterCard, Visa, Stripe, like they clearly see a lot of future with integrating crypto, and they sort of see that as a sort of key competition ground these days.
Yeah, so there's a couple of interesting questions to me. Just kind of abstracting away the specific players here. One is, there was a lot of conversation kind of in my early days of crypto, which was 2017, around like the utility of private permission blockchains versus public blockchains. And there was kind of a very over the last few years, there's been a very strong move towards, public permissionless blockchains. And I think that the growth of these kind of company-specific L1s sort of feels like people are trying to revive the private permission blockchain thesis, which I think we've seen unsuccessful in the past and unsuccessful for very, very good reasons. So I am curious to see whether or not the private permission blockchains are actually kind of workable in today's kind of world. The second question that I think is potentially interesting, and maybe leads into a conversation around BAM, is value accrual or value capture, whether it's on the L1s or the apps that are built on top of the L1s. And I think that if you're going to build an L1, I think that, there's lots of good reasons to do it, like, capturing some of the transaction revenue on payment system, I think that's perfectly reasonable. But I do think that maybe we've seen some evidence that the value accrual I think it's unclear whether or not, the dominant narrative is going to be that value accrual comes down to the L1 or is on the apps that are built on the L1. So, if Stripe or Circle are building kind of payment-specific stablecoin blockchains, then you don't really see like a tremendous opportunity, greenfield, for like apps that are built on top of it. And so it's mostly on like how much value can the L1 capture, whereas I think Solana and especially Jito in the form of BAM are kind of betting on the other way, which is building an environment for apps.
Okay, can you tell me more about BAM? Like, so what is it?
Yeah, so BAM's something that we've been working on and kind of ideating for the past like probably 8 or 9 months now. Started working on it in like November, December, and essentially it's kind of a proposed new transaction processing architecture for Solana. And basically the goal is to ensure that users get the best pricing and they get increased privacy. Institutions get the best execution they can, and with some kind of proofs around that. And then, just really focusing on how do we create a lot of value for applications on Solana. So there's a few kind of like technical pieces here. There's like a BAM node and a BAM validator client. But yeah, the goals and like what users will see if BAM's successful is just like really tight spreads on Solana. So they can get, I mean, we already see this today with some of the prop AMMs on Solana where spreads are actually tighter than Binance for like Sol USDC. So hopefully we can make those way tighter, get users the best possible pricing, and just make a really friendly execution environment for users and market makers and institutions.
So does it deal with the issue of sort of front running and sort of spam and things like that? Because I know there was, I can't remember exactly when, maybe a year ago, when it was like Solana was just getting completely congested and it was super hard to use. Is this addressing some of these issues?
Yeah, it does address some of those issues. So on the sandwiching is really hard to track down the different parties that are involved. They call it the MEV dark forest, and that's actually what got me into researching on MEV and starting Jito. Is Dan Robinson from Paradigm wrote an article on the dark forest on Ethereum, and that kind of just nerd sniped me, and I fell down that rabbit hole. But yeah, it's really hard to figure out what's going on, and BAM aims to make things more transparent, and it will also run inside of a trusted execution environment. For those that don't know, it's basically like a secure vault or like a secure and encrypted kind of subsystem in a computer where no one can see what's like the memory contents and the transactions inside of it. TEs are in like iPhones and Macs and every server grade processor, so pretty common technology. And then yeah, there's the Onza team has done a lot to reduce and like mitigate a lot of the spam with some better performance on the scheduler and networking stack. We've done a lot as well. So yeah, if you actually look at the revert rate on Solana, it's like probably the lowest it's ever been. There's just I think maybe 2 weeks ago, the network got a 20% bump in capacity. There's another SIMD to bump that up to almost double it. That will probably go live in the next 6 to 12 months. And so, yeah, the network's going to keep getting faster and faster and have more capacity.
Would you say it's an exciting time to be building within sort of Solana at this time? Like, obviously, I remember early days, it was super exciting. It's had sort of big peaks, big sort of troughs when it's, I don't know, had the block issues many years ago. How would you say the sort of feeling is amongst like the Solana ecosystem right now?
I would say it's really good. It was a lot better when Sol ETH was up only, but I think there's a lot of like really long-term builders on Solana that we've known. We definitely weren't the first team on Solana, but there's been a lot of builders that have stuck around, and then we're also seeing a ton of inflow of new builders. If you talk to any VC today, like they will tell you that the quality bar and the amount of talent that's coming onto Solana like far surpasses any other blockchain. And so there's a lot of cool stuff going on, both at like the infrastructure layer with the appearance of these proprietary AMMs that are just quoting really tight, giving users really good pricing on assets, to like the application layer and trading and DPIN. So yeah, it's just there's like a ton of cool stuff going on the builder side. I'm sure Tom sees some of it on the institutional side as well.
Yeah, so in my last shop, we were kind of blockchain and protocol agnostic. And so I've never really done a deep dive into any protocol until I joined Jito a few months ago. And look, I know that there's kind of a lot of tribalism and stuff in crypto Twitter, but my experience in Solana has just been amazing. I think that the people in Solana are terrific. I think there's lots of really great minds working on hard problems, and that's, I don't know what more you can ask for. So, like, I don't know. I tend to take the long-term approach, or the long-term view. Like, scorekeeping in the early innings of any game is just like, is not particularly meaningful. And so I think that Solana is as well positioned as any blockchain to kind of be a foundational piece for the future.
Yeah, and sorry that Kelvin keeps dropping in and out. He's trying his best to get back on the podcast, but it doesn't seem to be going well. Sorry, Lucas, you mentioned he's not. He's in New York. He well, hot over there, but at least they get AC. Sorry, Lucas, you mentioned like Sol ETH. Like, do you think the price of Sol is struggling because it's not getting a sort of push from the treasury companies? Because like that's sort of switching to ETH right now, so there's quite a big boom there. Whereas like Sol was going to have one with Joe McCann, but then that's I think cancelled, and it hasn't quite caught on in the same way.
That's a good question. I am not the best trader. I'm certainly not the best at macro. If I had to guess, the DATs, the treasury companies, are likely helping a lot with the price of Ethereum. There's a few Solana DATs, and then there's likely going to be a few more. So I think that will really help. But yeah, I would say like the DATs are one thing, but like if you actually look at like nothing has really changed fundamentally with Ethereum other than the price going up. Like there's not really any crazy technology advances going on in the L1. There's a lot going on in the L2 side, but if you compare the fundamentals of that to like something like Solana, where it's basically block space has gone up like 20 or 30% in the last 6 months. Network's getting faster and faster. It's doing more transactions per second than all other networks combined. It's the #1 chain for application revenue. There's definitely a mismatch there between like the fundamentals and the price. So I think that will catch up pretty soon here.
Okay, and we've seen with like the Solana Twitter account sort of trying to reach like a wider audience, yet there was a bit of mild controversy over like their sort of approach recently. Like, do you think they're taking the right approach, or do you think they should be more sort of crypto native focused?
I would say that they're taking a lot of shots on goal, which I like. They're in their arena trying things. I think that we need to find a way to kind of break out of this bubble. Like, how do we reach others? In like the decentralization story it's not like a super sexy story. It doesn't really sell unless you've been like personally impacted, like your bank account's frozen or something like that. So like trying to take more shots on goal and like kind of break out is going to be pretty valuable. They're definitely doing the most out of any other L1 to kind of do that. So yeah, I think they should kind of keep experimenting, take feedback, and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely could be more users in crypto. Like, I was just thinking just now, I wonder if there's more tokens than people in crypto, like sort of hardcore people in crypto. And kind of judging at sort of this rate, we might get to a point where there's as many blockchains, layer 1s and layer 2s as sort of people in crypto. So, yeah.
I think all that will consolidate over, every cycle. People say that there's no more cycles, but there's way too many blockchains right now for the amount of users. So all that stuff's going to consolidate, and I think Solana already has a lot of consolidation as far as like all these apps. So I think there's going to be a lot of people that just whatever L2 they're on, if they're developing an app or something on some Ghost L2, then they'll kind of consolidate onto the main L2s or Solana.
Yeah, I do. I wonder if that'll happen. But I like sort of remember back in the day, it felt like there was scarcity, like real sort of scarcity, and now it feels like there's just a huge amount of sort of blockchains sort of demanding your attention, and I think like I haven't seen it slowing down, I guess, but I do think if there was more scarcity, I don't know, people might see that altcoins performing a bit better.
Yeah, I've gone kind of back and forth on this internally. Like, people should be able to experiment. I think the experiments are cool. Like, we're not just building like an EVM L2. We're gonna like take some opinionated approach, like Hyperliquid experimenting on its market structure has proven to be super valuable. There's some other L2s that are doing this as well. So I think those should be good, or those are good. And I kind of go back to Solana. Like, people used to shit on Solana all the time, call it a ghost chain, all this stuff, because they were doing something unique. They wrote completely new virtual machine, super fast, made trade-offs that other people weren't willing to make. And like, because Solana experimented, it got to where it was today. And so I think if you kind of take the approach that like all these chains are bad, then like you're kind of, if I were to go back in time, then it would have been like, well, we just shouldn't do Solana. We should just stick with what we know. But like most companies, like there's going to be a lot of failures. So kind of just let the market work itself out.
Yeah, I never heard that criticism of Solana being a ghost chain. Like, maybe I just missed that, but I always saw it as bustling, with a very active community, unless it's sort of before I ever started using it. What do you think? Is there like an equivalent to Zora on Solana?
I'd probably say like pump.fun or time.fun, kind of like that. I haven't used Zora, to be honest, but it seems like another kind of like meme coin or creator coin type thing. Maybe the closest would be like a time.fun.
Yeah, definitely quite similar. It's about sort of tokenizing posts. It definitely seems to be catching on quite a bit. What do you think of the competition between Pump.Fun and Bonk?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the competition is good. I think that in any competition, there's going to be like intense focus on the other people that you're competing with. So if you're on Twitter, you see like Pump.Fun talking about Bonk or Bonk talking about Pump.Fun. I think that there's a world where they both succeed and they can just like keep building the best product that they can. So yeah, I would say they kind of took different routes to get where they are. Bonk's kind of like the OG meme coin on Solana. It's like one of the main reasons why Solana's successful today. And then also like just going back to the reasons why Solana Labs is a phone company is because of Bonk. I don't know if you remember this, Tim, but Bonk was like, they had some amount of Bonk on the phones. And when Bonk started going up, the amount of Bonk on the phone was worth more than the price of the phone. So people started like arbitraging that by buying the phone and selling the Bonk on it. So they like completely sold out of all their phones in a few days. And that kind of gave them the boost to create the Seeker. So yeah, that's kind of like some Bonk lore for some people that are maybe weren't around at that time. But yeah, I think they can both be successful and like hope that they just like focus on the strengths that they can provide.
Yeah, I remember that happening. I didn't remember what the token was, but I definitely remember that happening. We covered it for sure when I was in the newsroom. Yeah, and then the announcement of the new phone looks cool. I haven't had a chance to get my hands on one, but potentially soon. Now, so what's next for Jito? For, I guess, like, what are your sort of priorities for the rest of 2025?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about BAM, and then Thomas can kind of talk about Jito Soul. But yeah, I would say like continuing to roll out BAM is a pretty high priority for us. We kind of have a small number of validators running on testnet today, and there's a lot of engineering work going on to get that ready for mainnet. And been talking to a ton of applications on Solana. Like, hey, if you could build this, if you like, what do you want inside BAM? Like, how can we make it better for you to build your app on Solana? So trying to understand all the needs and condense them into products that we can put inside BAM. So yeah, we'll be rolling out to mainnet on that pretty soon here, and then yeah, Thomas is and the rest of the team have been cooking a lot on Jito Sol as well. So I'll kind of let him comment on that.
Yeah. Well, before we get to Jito Sol, it's kind of worth mentioning that we have another large vertical in the firm, which is restaking. I'll be very honest, I know very little about it because some of it is quite technical, but I do have been very surprised at the number of projects that have been excited about joining as a restaker. So I think we recently had Opacity join as on the restaking platform. But the other major vertical, as Lucas alluded to, was Jito Sol. How do we get the liquid staking token in the hands of as many people as we can? And so in some ways it subverts like this kind of dominant narrative around real world assets, tokenizing real world assets, because what we're doing is actually taking a digitally native asset and putting in the hands of people who, you know, can only trade because, you know, through their brokerage accounts, or who get prime financing from their prime brokers or things like that. And so, you know, the ETFs is a very significant part of that growth story, but I think that there's lots of different and new applications that we are just kind of scratching the surface on, whether it is kind of on-chain via some of these DeFi vaults, or by the inclusion of these into kind of treasury management products, structured products, or insurance products. There's a pretty interesting, or in kind of very nerdy little kind of fixed versus floating element to it that might be very, very attractive for certain users. So how do we kind of give people access to this product that has today like a base yield between 7 and 8%? Like if you just start with that as a, like a lot of things, it piques a lot of people's interest, particularly in TradFi. And so, yeah, watch this space. We expect Jito Sol to become as ubiquitous as we can make it by the end of the year.
Awesome. Big direction for the project. That's all we have time for today. I want to thank Lucas and Thomas for joining. And as a reminder, Newsroom works tirelessly to get you accurate, informed crypto news. If you want to stay ahead, read the blog. Thanks, and see you next time.